What if the greatest apex predator from Earth's ancient past crashed into a galaxy where survival means more than just strength, where even titans fall to forces beyond comprehension, and where one creature's primal fury could shake the foundations of the Imperium itself? This is the story of what happens when King Kong, the last of his kind, finds himself thrust into the nightmare universe of Warhammer 40K, where his raw power and ancient intelligence collide with forces that have shaped the fate of billions. In a cosmos where even gods bleed, can one primal king change the course of destiny itself? The death world of Catachan had been designated for resource extraction by the Departamento Munitorum precisely because it was considered expendable. Its jungle canopies stretched across 3 continents, harboring predators that had evolved in isolation for millennia, creating an ecosystem so hostile that only the most desperate colonists had attempted settlement. Those few thousand souls clung to existence in fortified compounds, harvesting rare minerals and exotic chemicals from the planet's volcanic heart, while losing an average of 12% of their population annually to the dangers lurking beyond their walls. It was, in other words, exactly the kind of world the Imperium considered suitable for risky operations, which made it perfect for what was about to happen. The warp storm that tore through Catachan's orbit came without warning, a phenomenon so violent that it registered on Astronomicon arrays 3 sectors away. Reality itself seemed to fracture as the immaterium bled into real space, creating a wound in the fabric of existence that pulsed with impossible colors and geometries that drove servitors to malfunction just from processing the sensor data. From the maelstrom emerged not a demon horde or chaos fleet, but something far more unexpected, a single massive object, organic in nature, plummeting toward the planet's surface like a meteor of flesh and bone. The object struck the deepest jungle region with the force of an orbital bombardment. Ancient trees that had stood for 10,000 years were flattened in an instant. The shockwave registered on seismographs in every settlement on the planet, triggering evacuation protocols and panic among colonists who had survived this long by recognizing when something truly dangerous had arrived in. When the dust and debris finally settled, a crater 3 kilometers wide marked the impact site, and at its center something stirred. Kong awakened to agony and confusion. His last memory was of his island, his home, the place where he had reigned as undisputed king. There had been a storm, yes, but not of wind and rain. And something else, something that tore at the very essence of reality, had ripped him from his world and hurled him through dimensions of chaos and impossible visions. Now he lay broken in alien soil, his massive body protesting with injuries that would have ended any lesser creature a dozen times over. But Kong was not a lesser creature. He was primordial fury given form, evolution's perfect predator, and he had survived extinction itself. He would survive this too. Slowly, agonizingly, the Titan pushed himself upright. His eyes, burning with intelligence that seemed almost human yet wholly other, surveyed his surroundings. This was not his jungle. The trees were wrong, their bark crystalline and sharp. The air tasted of chemicals and corruption. The sounds were alien, filled with screeches and roars of creatures he did not recognize. But the fundamental truth remained unchanged. This was a jungle, and in any jungle, there could be only one king. Kong beat his chest, the sound reverberating across the crater like thunder. It was a declaration, a challenge, and a promise all at once. Whatever this place was, whatever had brought him here, he would adapt. He would survive. He would dominate depth. The response came not from the jungle, but from above. 3 Valkyrie assault carriers descended through the canopy, their engines roaring, searchlights cutting through the perpetual gloom. Aboard the lead transport, Colonel Vasquez of the 12th Catachan Jungle Fighters studied the massive figure through magnified optics, her scarred face betraying no emotion despite what she was witnessing. Catachans were Death World veterans, men and women forged in environments that made standard guard training look like basic exercises. They feared nothing the galaxy could throw at them. But even Vasquez felt a primal unease looking at Kong. "Whatever that thing is," her second-in-command muttered, "it's not in any xenobiology catalog I've ever seen. Too big to be an ambolo, wrong configuration for a Catachan devil, and those eyes." He trailed off, apparently unable to articulate what disturbed him about those burning, intelligent orbs. "It bleeds," Vasquez said flatly, noting the dark fluid matting Kong's fur in several places. "Anything that bleeds can be stopped. All units, standard encirclement pattern. Fight. Heavy weapons. Teams establish firing solutions. We're neutralizing this threat before it reaches the settlements." The Catachans deployed with the efficiency of soldiers who had fought in environments where a single mistake meant death. They moved through the hostile jungle as if born to it, which in a sense they were, establishing positions in the trees and undergrowth with perfect sight lines to the crater. Autocannons were positioned on elevated platforms, their crews working despite the environmental suits as they loaded armor-piercing rounds. Demolition teams planted charges along likely approach routes. In 15 minutes, they had transformed the area into a defensive zone that could neutralize a carnifex. Kong watched these preparations with calculating intelligence. He understood traps, understood hunters. On his island, he had faced everything from giant serpents to prehistoric dangers that challenged his supremacy. These small creatures, these tool users, were different in their methods, but not in their intent. They feared him, and fear made them dangerous. But fear also made them predictable. He moved with speed that should have been impossible for something of his size, crossing 200 meters of jungle in seconds, not toward the prepared positions but away, deeper into the alien forest. The Catachans opened fire anyway. Autocannon rounds chewing through the crystalline trees, explosive bolts detonating against stone and vegetation, but Kong was already gone, vanished into terrain he was learning to read with every passing moment. "By the throne," Vasquez swore, watching her defensive zone tear itself apart with no target. "It anticipated our fire pattern. That thing is intelligent, tactically combat intelligent." She activated her Vox unit, broadcasting to all Catachan forces on planet. "All units, be advised we have a hostile entity, extreme threat level. Humanoid configuration, approximately 40 meters tall, demonstrating advanced cognitive function and tactical awareness. Conventional ambush protocols ineffective, switching to hunter-tracker doctrine." What followed over the next 3 days was unlike any campaign the Catachans had ever fought. Kong moved through the jungle of Katara, nine like a phantom despite his enormous size, learning its rhythms, its dangers, its resources. He discovered quickly that many of the native predators, creatures that would have challenged even him individually, could be redirected against the pursuing humans. A roar here, a strategic retreat there, and suddenly the Catachans found themselves fighting not just Kong, but the entire hostile ecosystem of the Death World. The Titan also learned about his enemies. He observed their weapons from a distance, noting their range and power. He watched how they communicated, recognized their command structure by which individuals gave orders and which followed. When he finally struck, it was with precision that would have impressed even a master tactician. He targeted supply lines first, destroying ammunition dumps and field hospitals without causing mass casualties, crippling the Catachan operation's logistical backbone. Then he targeted their heavy weapons, the autocannons and missile launchers that posed the only real threat to him, destroying the equipment while leaving the crew alive but shaken. It was this last detail that caught the attention of Inquisitor Hadrian Vale. The Ordo Xenos operative had been investigating reports of warp disturbances in the sector when the incident on Tyranid was flagged to his attention. What drew his interest was not the creature itself, impressive though it was, but its behavior. Hostile entities didn't show restraint. Orcs would have attacked everyone they encountered. Tyranids would have consumed all biomass. Even the most cunning Kroot would have been more aggressive. But this entity was deliberately choosing not to cause casualties when it easily could. That suggested something far more interesting than a simple beast. Vale arrived on Catara 9 with a retinue that reflected his unusual approach to his inquisitorial duties. Rather than the standard complement of stormtroopers and acolytes, he brought xenobiologists, behavioral analysts, and most controversially, a small delegation from the Adeptus Mechanicus who specialized in studying borderline sentient species. His plan was not to eliminate Kong, at least not immediately, but to understand him. The creature demonstrates problem-solving abilities that exceed many sanctioned abhuman strains, reported Melgo's Biology's Theta 9, reviewing data collected from drone surveillance. Observe this footage from Sector 7 Gamma. The entity encountered a Catachan minefield, and rather than triggering the explosives through brute force, it used a felled tree trunk to probe the ground ahead, then through debris to clear a safe path. Tool use combined with abstract thinking. Remarkable. Vale studied the hollow display with keen interest. And the restraint in casualties? Your analysis? Multiple possibilities, Theta 9 replied, her mechadendrites twitching as she processed calculations. It may recognize humans as non-threatening individually and sees no purpose in harming them. It may be conserving energy while injured. Or most intriguingly, it may possess a moral framework that distinguishes between threats and non-combatants. Morality. Vale mused. In a creature of this nature, the implications are significant from a doctrinal standpoint. Indeed, which is precisely why the Mechanicus wishes to study rather than terminate the specimen. It may represent a unique evolutionary branch, possibly even a remnant from Terra's prehistoric past somehow preserved through unknown means. Before Vale could respond, Colonel Vasquez entered the command center, her face tight with frustration. Inquisitor, with respect, every hour we spend observing that thing is an hour it has to harm more of my soldiers. We should be calling down an orbital strike, not treating this like a research expedition. Vale's expression remained calm. Your soldiers are alive, Colonel, precisely because the creature chooses to leave them that way. It could have caused far more damage by now. Instead, it targets equipment and infrastructure. That restraint is what makes this situation unique and worth investigating. Restraint? Vasquez's voice rose. It's destroyed 3 outposts, crippled our mechanized support, and sent 24 men to the Medici with injuries. Some restraint. Compared to what it could do? Yes. Vale gestured to another hollow display showing Kong's estimated physical capabilities based on observed feats. This entity has demonstrated the strength to overturn armored vehicles, the durability to withstand heavy bolter fire, and the speed to evade artillery barrages. If it wanted your soldiers terminated, Colonel, they would be. Instead, it's sending a message. Leave me alone. Vasquez was about to retort when alarms blared throughout the command center. A Vox operator called out urgently, Sir, we have a situation at Settlement Primus. Multiple contacts, unknown configuration, emerging from the deep jungle, not the Titan. These are different, smaller but numerous. The surveillance feed switched to show Settlement Primus, the largest colonial outpost on Kitara, 9. The fortified barriers that had safeguarded its 3,000 residents for 20 years were being assaulted by entities that caused even veteran Death World soldiers to feel visceral dread. These abominations scuttled on an excessive number of limbs, their forms representing a grotesque merger of chitinous insect and scaled reptile anatomies, sporting jaws that secreted glowing toxic fluid and carapaces that appeared to absorb lost beam impact. Scores of them, rapidly multiplying to hundreds, emerged from the jungle vegetation in a synchronized onslaught. What in the Emperor's name are those? Vasquez demanded. Theta 9's response was clinically precise and utterly concerning. Genestealers, 4th generation by the BIOS signature. This world has been seeded by the Tyranid hive mind. The colonists have been living near a Genestealer cult without knowing it. The implications crashed down on everyone in the command center. Genestealers meant Tyranids. And if the cult had progressed to 4th generation, that meant a Hive Fleet was close, possibly already in system. Settlement Primus wasn't just under attack. It was the trigger for a planetary infestation that could spread across Kitara, 9, and beyond. All Catachan forces converge on Settlement Primus, Vasquez ordered, military discipline overriding her shock. We need to establish a defensive perimeter before those things breach the walls. But even as Valkyries scrambled and ground forces mobilized, everyone knew the terrible truth. The Catachans were scattered across the jungle, tracking Kong. Regrouping would take hours. Settlement Primus had minutes. Kong heard the screams before he saw the settlement. His wandering through this alien jungle had brought him to higher ground, a rocky outcropping that provided a vantage point over the landscape. From here, he could see the human structures, their lights and walls, so different from the primitive villages of his island, yet serving the same purpose: shelter from the dangers outside. And he could see those dangers now, a seething mass of unnatural creatures that assaulted the walls with single-minded ferocity. Something in Kong's ancient brain recognized the wrongness of these beings. They were not predators in the natural sense, not part of any ecosystem. They were corruption, invasion, a plague that consumed rather than coexisted. On his island, Kong had been more than a king. He had been protector, maintaining the balance that allowed his realm to thrive. These creatures threatened not just humans, but the jungle itself, spreading their taint with every step. The Titan beat his chest once, the sound carrying across the kilometers. Then he charged. The Tyranid organisms attacking settlement, Primus operated with the efficiency of a distributed neural network, each Genestealer an extension of the Gestalt consciousness that guided them. They had anticipated human resistance, lost fire, and crude explosives, and were adapting their assault patterns to minimize losses while maximizing penetration of the defenses. What they had not anticipated, what their alien intelligence had no framework to process, was Kong. The Titan hit the swarm like a meteor. His massive fists crushed Genestealers by the dozens, each impact sending broken bodies flying. His roars, primal and deafening, echoed off the settlement walls. The creatures tried to swarm him as they would any large threat, using their numbers to overwhelm even the mightiest foe. But Kong had fought giant serpents that could have wrapped around him 10 times over, had battled prehistoric predators that hunted in packs. He knew how to deal with swarm tactics. He seized a Genestealer in each hand and used them as weapons, swinging the thrashing creatures to clear space around him. He stomped and crushed, using his tremendous weight to maximum effect. When they tried to climb him, he threw himself against the nearby trees, using the crystalline bark to scrape them off. Blood, both his own and the aliens', soon covered his midnight fur, but Kong fought with undiminished fury. On the settlement walls, the defenders stared in disbelief. "Is that thing helping us?" one militiaman asked, his voice cracking with exhaustion and shock. "Don't question it," his sergeant barked. "Just keep firing. Support the creature." The wall, mounted heavy stubbers swiveled, targeting the Genestealers trying to flank Kong's position. For a surreal moment, humans and Titan fought side by side against a common enemy. The battle raged for 2 hours. By the time the first Catachan reinforcements arrived, the swarm had been broken. Genestealer corpses littered the ground in heaps, and Kong stood at the center of the aftermath, breathing heavily, wounded in a dozen places but unbowed. When the Valkyries descended, the Titan regarded them with those burning eyes, then turned and walked back toward the jungle, leaving behind stunned soldiers and grateful colonists. "Hold fire," Vale commanded through the Vox, overriding Vasquez's instinct to engage. "Let it go." "Inquisitor, we have a clean shot," I said. "Let it go, Colonel." Vale's voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "That creature just saved 3,000 Imperial citizens. Whatever it is, whatever brought it here, it has earned 1 day of peace." In the command center, Magos Theta 9 reviewed the battle footage with fascination bordering on awe. Extraordinary, it recognized the Tyranid organisms as a greater threat and chose to defend the settlement despite having every reason to avoid human contact. This demonstrates not just intelligence but empathy, altruism even. The specimen's cognitive complexity may rival baseline human standards. Vale nodded slowly, pieces of a larger puzzle falling into place in his mind. Or it's operating on instincts so deep they predate human civilization. Territorial defense, protection of the vulnerable, maintaining ecological balance. These aren't learned behaviors, they're fundamental to its nature. Which raises the question, Theta 9 continued, of what we do now. The Tyranid presence changes everything. If a Hive Fleet is approaching, this world will be consumed regardless of how powerful the specimen is. Even it cannot stand against the endless swarm. That night, as Katara 9's twin moons rose over the jungle, Kong found a cave system in the volcanic mountains that reminded him, however faintly, of home. He tended his wounds with instinctive knowledge, packing them with mineral-rich mud that would help them heal. His body, evolved for impossible resilience, was already beginning to repair itself. Within days, he would be at full strength again, but strength alone would not solve his true problem. Kong understood, in the wordless way of ancient intelligence, that he was lost. This was not his world, not his jungle, not his place in the natural order. Everything here was wrong, twisted, hostile, in ways that went beyond mere predation. Even the air tasted of corruption, as if the very planet was afflicted with something his instincts urged him to oppose, but didn't know how to fight. The Titan's contemplation was interrupted by an unexpected sound, a single human, approaching alone through the darkness. Kong could have stopped the intruder in an instant, but something made him pause. This human walked differently from the others, with neither fear nor aggression, just steady purpose. Kong watched from the shadows as Inquisitor Vale entered the cave system, a portable illuminator in one hand, and, remarkably, no visible weapons in the other. "I come to talk, not fight," Vale called out in Gothic, knowing the creature likely couldn't understand his words but hoping his tone would convey intent. "I know you can hear me. I know you understand more than you should." He paused, then did something that would have concerned his more orthodox colleagues. He sat down on a rock, making himself vulnerable, showing trust. Kong emerged from the darkness, his massive form filling the cave entrance. Vale kept his breathing steady through sheer discipline as the Titan approached, close enough that the Inquisitor could feel the heat radiating from its wounded body. They regarded each other in silence, human and beast, both intelligent, both alone in their own ways. "You're not from this galaxy, are you?" Vale said softly. "The warp storm brought you here from somewhere else, somewhere the laws of nature were different, simpler maybe, and now you're trapped in a nightmare universe where everything wants to harm you or corrupt you, and you don't even know why." Kong tilted his massive head slightly, those burning eyes studying the human with unsettling intensity. Vale continued, "The creatures you fought today are just the beginning. More will come, far more than even you can handle. This world is in danger, unless we can eliminate the Genestealer infestation completely, and to do that, I need to find their source, their patriarch, the firstborn of the brood that started this cult decades ago. It will be deep underground, heavily guarded, in the darkest, most dangerous parts of this jungle." He stood slowly, maintaining eye contact. "I think you already know where it is, don't you? You've been exploring this world, learning its secrets. Creatures like you, apex predators, you always know where the biggest threats are." Kong rumbled, a sound that vibrated through the cave walls. It wasn't a roar or a threat, it was almost like consideration. "Help me, Vale said simply. "Help me stop the Patriarch, and I promise you this, I will find a way to send you home. The warp brought you here, which means the warp can return you. I have resources, connections, entire worlds of knowledge at my disposal. Give me time and cooperation, and I will solve this puzzle." The Titan and the Inquisitor remained locked in their silent communication for a long moment. Then Kong did something that would be debated by Imperial scholars for years to come. He nodded, just once, slowly, unmistakably, agreement. What followed was the strangest military operation in the history of the Ordo Xenos. Inquisitor Vale organized an expedition into the deepest, most hostile regions of Tyranid, areas where even Catachans feared to tread. His force consisted of elite jungle fighters, mechanicus explorators with specialized scanning equipment, and leading from the front, Kong himself. The Titan had become an unlikely ally, not through any formal oath or psychic compulsion, but through mutual understanding and shared purpose. The journey took 5 days of hard march through terrain that tested even Kong's incredible endurance. The jungle grew darker and more twisted as they descended into volcanic cavern systems where the air itself seemed alive with menace. They fought through swarms of lesser Tyranid organisms, each battle proving the devastating effectiveness of coordinating Kong's raw power with human tactical support and firepower. The Titan would break enemy formations, while Catachan flamers purged the scattered remnants. It was brutal, efficient, and proof that humanity could adapt even to the most unlikely circumstances. They found the Patriarch in a cavern chamber of bio-organic matter, a space that had been warped into something that hurt human eyes to perceive. The creature itself was a nightmare given form, a Genestealer of the first generation, massive and ancient, its body a fusion of human and alien traits that represented the cult's origin point. Around it crawled hundreds of hybrid monstrosities, the generations of tainted offspring that would birth the true Tyranid swarm when the Hive Fleet arrived. Kong recognized the Patriarch for what it was, the source, the corruption that had poisoned this jungle. And in his primal way, he understood that this was why he had been brought here, why the storm had torn him from his world and hurled him across dimensions. Not punishment, but purpose. He was here to do what he had always done. Protect, defend, fight against that which threatened the natural order. The battle was apocalyptic. The Patriarch was no mere beast but a creature enhanced by Tyranid bioengineering with psychic abilities that let it coordinate its entire brood simultaneously. It struck at minds and bodies simultaneously, and several of Vale's team fell, their sanity shattered by alien thoughts forcing their way into human consciousness. But Kong was not human. His mind worked in ways the Patriarch couldn't fully comprehend or subvert. Where psychic assault failed, physical combat took over. Titan and alien monster crashed together in the center of that organic chamber, Kong's fists against the Patriarch's razor talons, primal fury against hive-minded cold calculation. The cavern shook with their battle, formations of biomatter raining down as the combatants used everything as weapons. Kong bled from dozens of wounds but felt no pain, only purpose. This was what he was made for. This was why he existed. To be the unmovable object, the unstoppable guardian, the king who never surrendered his domain. When Kong's hands finally closed around the Patriarch's head and twisted, the psychic shriek that resulted affected 3 more of Vale's team instantly. But with its termination, the connection to the brood was severed. The hundreds of hybrids suddenly found themselves without coordination, without unified purpose, and the Catachans showed no mercy in the purge that followed. By the time they emerged from the caverns 3 days later, carrying proof of the Patriarch's defeat, Kong was barely able to stand. His wounds were severe enough that even his incredible regeneration was struggling to cope. But he had survived, and more importantly, he had won. The Genestealer cult of Catara 9 was broken, its source destroyed, the Tyranid threat neutralized before the Hive Fleet could arrive to find a world prepared for their consumption. Inquisitor Vale kept his promise, though it took 6 months and resources that would have funded a small crusade. Using records from the Adeptus Mechanicus's most restricted archives, consulting with rogue traders who had navigated the warp's strangest anomalies, and calling in favors from several radical inquisitors who owed him debts, Vale assembled the components for a controlled warp breach. It was phenomenally dangerous, potentially controversial, and exactly the kind of solution that demonstrated why the Ordo Xenos existed. To deal with problems that had no orthodox answers. On the day of Kong's departure, colonists from every settlement on Catara 9 gathered to witness the event. The Titan had become legend among them, the Mountain King who had appeared from nowhere to save them from extinction. They brought offerings, not in worship but in gratitude, food, crafted items they knew he wouldn't use, symbols of respect from one survivor species to another. Kong accepted these offerings with what might have been understanding. He had learned much in his time in this nightmare galaxy. He had seen challenges beyond anything his island had prepared him for, faced enemies that defied nature itself. But he had also seen courage, adaptation, the sheer stubborn will of humans to survive against impossible odds. They were vulnerable individually, these hairless primates, but together they were something formidable. He could respect that, even if he would never truly understand their galaxy-spanning empire or their devotion to a distant emperor. As the warp breach opened, tearing a carefully controlled hole between dimensions, Kong took one last look at the jungle he had briefly claimed, the humans he had briefly defended, the Inquisitor who had kept his word. Then, without hesitation, he stepped through the breach and vanished, returning across the impossible distances between realities to his island, his world, his throne. The breach sealed behind him, leaving only the story. And in the records of the Ordo Xenos, hidden among files so classified that fewer than a dozen individuals in the entire Imperium had access to them, Inquisitor Hadrian Vale filed his report. It concluded with a single line that would puzzle future historians who stumbled across it. Subject demonstrated that even in a galaxy of threats, nobility can exist in the most unexpected forms. Threat assessment neutralized. Recommended status myth. Let him be remembered as he deserves. On Catachan, the colonists would tell the story for generations. They spoke of the Mountain King, the Titan from beyond reality, who came when they needed him most, fought beside them, and vanished like a dream. They built memorials not to worship but to remember, to honor the creature that proved threats could become protectors. And sometimes on quiet nights when the jungle pressed close and the moons cast strange shadows, they swore they could still hear it. The distant sound of a titan beating his chest, a primal thunder that promised protection to those who needed it most. Kong was gone, but his legend remained. And in the grim darkness of the far future, sometimes legends were the only light that kept the darkness at